Continuing our talk about composition, let's talk about structure. Structure is to govern the positioning of forms in a composition. Structure imposes order and predetermines internal relationships of forms. We can talk about structure in terms of formal structure, much more rigid and mathematical. Different categories here: repetition, symmetry, gradation, radial. It's much more visible structure. Informal then is free and indefinite. We can talk about it in terms of anomaly, asymmetry, contrast, or concentration. It's got a much more invisible structure. Let's look at some examples. Repetition in terms of formal structure. We can talk about repetition. Here, Frank Stella's painting, this repeated square, equally spaced, slowly coming down, all calculated in a very formal, consistent way. Andy Warhol used repetition to talk about consumerism and mass-produced products, as in these Campbell soup cans. Minimalists Carl Andre and Donald Judd talked about repetition in terms of sculpture, taking a simple form and repeating it over and over again in different ways. Symmetry is yet another formal compositional device. This is where we can cut the composition down the middle, and the left side will mirror the right side, like in this Frank Stella piece here. We can also do the same thing if we look at the films of Stanley Kubrick. He was a little bit obsessed with symmetry, and much of the shots within his films were kind of cut down the middle, and the left and right were mirrored in a very similar way. They're not completely perfect, but they're very similar. And then this idea of gradation. This is a gradual change in an orderly mathematical way. Like when we look up a skyscraper, how the windows all slowly get smaller as we go up, but it's done in a very orderly and mathematical sort of way. Same thing looking down a railroad track. Let's look at some work. Sarah Morris takes advantage of that idea of looking up a skyscraper. Here we have both a symmetrical work along with this concept of gradation being utilized, both as formal devices within this work, this very hard-edged sort of work. Bridget Riley was part of a group of artists called op artists. Here she's using both color theory and this idea of gradation, where these forms, mathematically slowly get smaller. And as you look at this for a while, things start to move and shift on you. That's the optical illusion that's created using this device. And Victor Vasarely, here he's using a gradation not only in terms of the forms, these squares slowly getting smaller and distorted, but he's also using gradation in terms of color, starting in the lighter pinks, going into the darker reds. Same things with the orange, the darker oranges going into the brighter oranges, a gradation in color. More obvious that is gradation in color is the work of Robert Swain. These transitions, so gradation can be, in an ordered way geometrically, can also be in an ordered way in terms of color. You can do it in terms of texture, on and on. And here's some different examples of that idea of gradation by Wucius Wong. Radial is another formal device, this concentric circle sort of notion, like in the Kenneth Nolan painting here, and in the Jasper John Target drawing on the right and the painting on the left. You also get some repetition in here, both formal devices. Let's talk about informal. Informal elements deal with tension and border on chaos, but it's an ordered chaos. Okay. Anomaly. You see the work of Lester Manzani set up this formal structure here, this grid, and then the paint splattered or smushed or spread over the top of that becomes the anomaly. It violates that structure. Same thing here, Lebbeus Wood drawing the radial formal geometry set up, and then these pieces become, these violations of that geometry become the anomaly. Let's talk about asymmetry. Now we divide the composition down the middle, and it's different on the left and the right. This may make sense for what you want to do in your composition, for the message you want to convey. And we look at the work of Peter Haley. Obviously divided down the middle, it is not the same on left and right. They do not mirror each other. Same thing with Carmen Herrera. It's close to almost being symmetrical, but this being smaller makes it asymmetrical on that side. And then the film work of Martin Scorsese make us feel uneasy by these really strong crops in asymmetrical compositions. He stole the idea from a guy named Alfred Hitchcock. This is from the movie Cape Fear, and I think this is from the movie Psycho, but these very strong asymmetrical compositions. Contrast within your composition. We can talk about contrast here in terms of shapes. We're starting with the larger shapes, slowly dwindling, not in an orderly way, in a more haphazard way, down into these smaller shapes. Same with the circles getting smaller, the squares getting smaller. So there's this contrast of scale within these shapes. Contrast in scale here, just this looks like whatever it is. I don't know what's going on here, but you don't get a sense of the mass of this thing until you get this contrast that happens with the size of the scale figures down here in the Daniel Dessous drawing here. And then other examples of contrast. That might be contrast in direction. Everything's heading this way, and just these two pieces break off. Everything's, a large circle, and these small pieces just disrupting the order in some way is what contrast and anomaly and asymmetry are meant to be, are meant to do. And then concentration refers to a way of distribution of elements which may be thickly gathered in certain areas or thinly scattered. This is a gathering of just marks that Robert Goodenough is making here, this gathering of the marks into the center of the composition. Here in Anastasi's pulled the marks to the outside of this composition. Maybe this makes sense. Maybe this tension is something that you want to convey in your composition. Play with the edges. Let things assemble. Let things gather. Let things break apart. You decide. Does it need to be more formal? Does it need more informal? And then finally this piece by Ellsworth Kelly with these sort of pixels all gathering towards the center as if they're being pulled in. And that is structure.